Welcome to Navigate Now, and this is the podcast where we get an understanding of the space around us and how we navigate that particular environment.
So let's get started. I'm Sandhya Session.
And I'm Jonathan Doxey.
And we're your hosts.
So the topic for today, we want to consider what is wayfinding. Now, that's a lot to talk about, right? So how do we summarise what wayfinding actually is? There's a lot of ways we can take this particular topic. And we're looking forward to exploring that together just now on this particular episode. But the way that I summarise what wayfinding is what I would say is it's how we find our way around the built environment. So it's really important to understand various aspects that come together to make that really important and get a clear understanding. So when we are navigating those environments, where we go around all day, every day, we do that seamlessly, successfully, but it's in an inclusive way, and we'll pick up that a little bit later as well. It's important, isn't it, to everyday life?
So what kind of environmental cues do we take into consideration when we're finding our way? So the first thing that pops into our head will be the signage and the design of it. So it could be the typography, it could be the pictograms that we use. So consider if I am, let's say, in Japan and I don't know the language. So that's where pictograms will come into play, where we kind of understand, okay, if you have a cup and a saucer, we know that it could be a cafe. And I don't need to necessarily know the language to kind of understand that, okay, this is where I'm headed and this is the direction I need to take. And so that kind of helps. We can also use shapes in the way of trying to find our way. So shapes in the design of signage, or shapes in wayfinding maps, or in our cues, in our visual cues, help us to find our way.
I think colour is really important as well, isn't it? Especially, say you've got a town or an industrial area where you want to create zones.
Yeah.
Colour can be really important and a great cue and a great help.
Kind of colour code the different areas. So we know that orange is this, and then we move into the violet zone, which is another zone of the industrial area.
Yeah, and one thing to pick up, isn't it? Because we've got colour, but say we've got someone who's colour blind, we need to make sure that we've got different delineators for different areas. So we could have a colour and a letter, a colour and a number, a colour and a pictogram to help people in that particular environment.
So basically giving more than one option to help find one's way.
I mean, we could go into that a lot further, couldn't we? But those are some of the key aspects of the design principles that wayfinding is all about. And kind of, you might say, well, where did that word actually come from? Now, there's a book here, don't know if anyone's read that, but it's by Kevin Lynch. It's called The Image of the City. When we talk about the word wayfinding, some people might call it way showing, which is another book on the bookshelf there by Per Muller called Way Showing. These words are used interchangeably. But Kevin, he came up with the word, he coined the phrase about how we find our way around the built environment. And he talks about those things that we'll touch on a little bit in this episode around navigating. He always talked about ants, how they navigate around, they have desire lines, they have key aspects that we can learn from about how people move around the built environment.
I think Kevin Lynch also spoke about points, nodes, landmarks, the use of landmarks. I think we can talk a little bit more about that as well as we go.
100%. Yeah, so if you want to get into wayfinding and know, that's the book to read, amongst others. So we often talk about the different ways that we can help people find their way around. People default, maybe, rightly or wrongly, within wayfinding to talk about signage. Is wayfinding about signage? In one sense, I would say no. It's a lot more than that. Wayfinding has various different, you might say, parts of the toolkit to help people find their way around. Signage is one of them. So if we were to just pick up on signage for a little bit, what would those things be that we would think are really important to get right? Orientation. I think we're going to talk about mapping a little bit later, but orientation is really, really key. Because we've all been in a hospital car park, where we've seen that map, and the building's there on the map, but actually the building's behind us in the physical space. And we have to rotate that in our head, and we're going to talk about cognitive behaviour and capacity in a little bit, and we might touch on that in another episode, because there's a lot we can learn and take from that. But orientation of the sign is really key. But also maybe not just orientation, the location.
Yeah.
So where things are placed in the journey of that user, I think are really key.
Yeah, I personally have had trouble. I would like to think I'm a little creative, but then I've always had trouble kind of orienting myself when I look at a map and it says you are here. So in my head, I'm trying to mirror image the map and then flip it around to see, okay, if this building is here, that means I need to go that way instead. So all of that kind of creates a lot more confusion, which is not very ideal when you're trying to help someone navigate their way in an environment. Why create so much stress?
100%. And that touches on something else we were going to pick up on, legibility.
Yeah.
Legibility is really key. That can be delivered through great design, like the typography, colour contrast, pictograms, all those things that we've just literally touched the surface of. But legibility is really important to make sure that every type of user that's in that environment can use that to the best of their ability. So we could be looking at scale, contrast, but let's forget signage for one element. Well, we're talking about signage. It could be the use of what graphics on the floors and where the doors are placed, where the footpaths are, and we'll touch on that in a second as well. So legibility, and that kind of segues into accessibility. Someone in a wheelchair, someone say coming back from recovery in a hospital, they might have a walking aid, etc., etc. We need to make sure that all of these environments are easily found the way, easy to find your way around. So accessibility is really key. We obviously have guidelines in the UK and in other territories around that, and there's definitely uses of technology that can be used to help people find their way around as well. I think one thing not to be forgotten when we're talking about signage and those different options for in that wayfinding toolkit, we might call it, is people.
Yeah. People
can be really good ambassadors for a place. It came to, this might date this episode, but kind of thinking back to London 2012 when we had the Olympics hosted in London. One of the greatest things about the games was the volunteers. Those people that were in there creating that great experience, but also guiding you and making sure you found exactly where you wanted to get to.
Yeah. Also, John, you'd spoken about how it's not just about signage, and I perfectly agree with that, because another thing that helps us in kind of wayfinding is the environmental assets that are there. So the footpaths, the seating, the lighting design, it could be internal lighting or external lighting. How one tries to find their way during the daytime is much different from how one might find their way in the nighttime.
Definitely.
So how well lit an environment is could also be a factor. Seating, for example, in a hospital environment, we would ideally want the visitor, the user, have a better experience in trying to find their way from point A to point B. So if we have seating in possibly long corridors, that makes the full journey a lot more enjoyable. It makes it a lot more accessible, which is what we want ultimately at the end of the day.
Specifically in hospitals, where the user type might have accessibility needs, hospitals are gonna need that facility more likely than others. But also in town centres and say a larger environment, say theme parks, all these types of environments where you're asking someone to walk a long way. We need to be able to or even flights of stairs. Say we've got like let's say the Eiffel Tower or some large tall building, where you maybe there's an element of walking as opposed to lifts, and then we can have breaks and rests in those places.
Also, I think in town centres we can also look at tactile surfaces. Making the space more accessible, helping people of all different needs trying to find their way, and I think that is key because every design in all sense should be inclusive and made easily accessible by all sections of our society. I think that's what makes a great design.
Footpaths come in there as well, don't they? So we spend a little bit of time in Portugal from time to time. Along the beaches, they've got great beaches, and you can walk along them. But say you're in a wheelchair, that's just impossible. So what they've done is they create loads of really long boardwalks.
Yeah.
So it gives a wider user base the opportunity to use that environment, but also they've put in seating and viewing points and say bird watching areas. So create an experience around that particular. It's not just a route. It's not just getting from A to B. I sometimes say wayfinding is about 2 Ds. It's about destination. It's about me getting from point A to point B, but it's about discovery as well.
Yeah.
Coming back, you were talking about the town centre environment. I might be in town to get a prescription, but it might be lunchtime. So where can I go and grab a bite to eat, grab a coffee, for example? So it's about understanding how we can, one aspect and one result of a successful wayfinding system is increasing dwell time.
Yeah.
Increasing people spending more time within that space. And that increases spend, increases return visits, etc., etc. So all of these parts of the toolkit that we're discussing, the design, the signage, the assets, all come together to make that completed wayfinding experience.
Yeah. Talking about dwell time, so something I've found very interesting in our internal environment, specifically is the airport. If you kind of look at the way the arrival route is designed and the departure route is designed, arrival aims to take you out of the building as soon as possible because everyone's famished and they want to get back home.
Yeah.
Whereas the departure takes you through an array of services that the airport can provide, which also helps the businesses, but also helps you trying to kind of enjoy the whole airport and the architectural marvel of it. And then it takes you to the gates because you already have to come a little early for your flights, and then you also have that dwell time where you can like roam around, walk around. But then for the departures, it's like that, and for the arrivals, you want the person to leave as soon as possible because that's what they would wish. So I think that's a unique way and a good way that wayfinding is kind of designed for these internal environments.
Another environment that we have in the UK is IKEA.
Yeah.
I haven't decided yet whether it's the best form of wayfinding or it's the worst. They have a very controlled route of how they take you around their retail environment, but just not the retail environment, the warehousing where you can go and pick up some elements of the products that you're choosing to buy. They organise it extremely accurately, but then they put in these little shortcuts. So that would kind of go back to what we were talking about, wasn't it? About kind of how we can use routes and footpaths to change that direction, to control how we navigate around, but also to give shortcuts. And there might be an environment as well where it might be, say, staff-only areas.
Yeah.
So going back to your example around airports, there could be an environment where there's access control required for specific, for staff, but even that could be segmented up as well.
Yep. And then we can look at another visual cue that we use. It could be landmarks.
Yes.
So the landmarks, let's say we're walking past the Leaning Tower of Pisa or the London Eye. Let's talk more locally. If we look at the London Eye, we kind of can orient ourselves and we'll be like, okay, the London Eye is on my right hand side. So probably now I need to take a right or I need to take a left. So these landmarks are very important visual cues that kind of take a very unique place in your mind, and it's very easy to remember. And that's the best part of having these visual cues. So landmarking is also a very important aspect of wayfinding and trying to find one's way, and also while designing wayfinding aspects for a new environment.
Yeah, like we often put a landmark on a map.
Yeah.
Or if we're kind of in a city space, say kind of London, say take New York, where it's kind of more high-rise buildings, you need those things that are above that environment, or those unique spaces. We might talk about architecture in a little bit, but unique buildings can be landmarks, sculpture, art, spaces, So parks and so open spaces as well, and the other elements of natural rights, so rivers, and railway lines. All these kind of things come together. Think, oh, I've crossed that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm that side of the river, that side of the park, that side of the building. Take London again, kind of the Gherkin, the Shard. These all have names.
Yeah.
That we use to navigate by.
Yeah.
And I guess in the UK, historically, take a typical English village. We have the cricket green, we have the pub, the church, the post office, and all these things we'll use as, like going back to Kevin's book, The Image in the City, as nodes, as cues, as triggers, to how we can then work around that environment.
Yeah, I think so. These landmarks could be built, as you said. It could also be as simple as the orange tree by the bench.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as the red color gate or the door. So I think those small aspects kind of make small junctions in your head to kind of find the way. So I go straight, oh, by the red door I need to take a left. And then I go straight again. By the river, I need to follow the river, along the river, and then I take a right at the bridge. So this is how I think we tend to remember the route. And this is to be also looked into while we are designing the wayfinding system as well, so that it kind of goes with how we naturally tend to remember routes and find our way. So
we're talking about kind of, when we talk about that, the legibility side, it's making sure everything works together. So if there's a landmark already in situ, we can use that as a cue. Whether it's a particular, even in the retail space, it could be a large shop, a large retail area, that can be used as a landmark. And we can include that and adopt that within the wayfinding system. Or we can use a wayfinding project as an opportunity to raise the profile or introduce landmarks. And I guess that's where art comes in as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that can start to tell a story. You can start to lift up the environment and unpeel the layers of the history, what goes on there, things that people wouldn't necessarily understand. You can create destinations as well. Kind of lots of people that I love New York is because, as I say that, you've got that image already in your mind, in sense. But people use their town names in the city environment to create Instagrammable places and spaces. So then that content then can be then transposed from that experience and that environment across to another audience.
Yeah. So we looked at the environment aspect of it. So in wayfinding, it's basically the interaction of the human with the environment. So we looked at the environment aspect. Now if we look at the human aspect of it, there are some things that come into play.
Yeah.
It could be our exposure. It could be our ability to understand the space around us. It could be our cultural background. The way I look at the space around me might be different to another person from another area, because their visual cues might be a lot different from mine. So all of these aspects, and that's where the spatial ability or the ability to kind of orient myself to understand how to find my way differs from person to person, and that's very important. So that's where the human factors of it comes into play into wayfinding. So we looked at the environment. Now when we look at ourselves, there's something called the spatial awareness, which is basically our awareness of the space and the environment we're in. As I said, this differs from person to person, and so when we look at, let's say I already am aware of how to navigate around area A, which might be the park, the Hyde Park. Let's say I know how to navigate around the Hyde Park, and so I have a mental image of everything that's in the park, and so it'll be a lot more easier for me to move around. And that's where what we say as mental map comes into play. So we very naturally have a mental imagery of what we need to do, especially in places where we already know the route. So if you're going to office, and you've been going to the office for the last 1 year, you already know near this tree I need to take a left.
It's
or
kind of
at
like
this bus stop.
autopilot, isn't it?
Yeah.
You jump in the car and you drive, and you know you're going to, like you say, the office or a family member's house or home or whatever it is, and you're an autopilot, because your cognitive brain
Yeah.
has, going back to about landmarks, we know that when we're there we have to make this choice, and when we're there we make the other choice in that sense. And so that's really an interesting aspect of how the brain operates.
Yeah. So we've already processed all of this information because we repeatedly go through the same area. And that's how our brain works. The brain takes information from what we see, the visual cues, as we spoke about, and then it processes it, and then it kind of makes a network of information, and that's what you kind of access when you go to the same environment or a similar environment. So let's say you've been going to an industrial area or a hospital A, and you know all of the information from that hospital. Now we are going to a new hospital where you've never been to before. But you know that certain signage or certain aspects of wayfinding is in the same similar place. And that's where you will organically look at. That's the first place you would look at. So you know the entrance sign is there. You know you need, the emergency will mostly be in this area. And you naturally gravitate towards that. That's where these mental models come into play. And that is a key aspect that you need to also look at when you're designing.
Yeah, 100%, because that we talked about pictograms, didn't we?
Yeah.
Thinking that hospital example, it's important that we use a standard set with understanding the environment in key. We take that as we've discussed. But say we always talk about phlebotomy, don't we? Blood tests.
Yeah.
Or take pharmacy as an example. When I mentioned pharmacy pictogram, you've probably got it already in your mind. It's green. It's crosshairs in that sense. It might have some lines in between it, etc., etc. But pharmacy, if we can use a standard set of design language across not just hospitals, but the healthcare, the medical environments, we then, in a sense, don't have to read it.
Yeah.
We just, our inner brain just goes, yeah, I'm going there.
Yeah. And when we talk about our cultural differences as well, what is green with a white cross in UK might not be the same in another country. And you might have visitors from different areas. So trying to keep the design as universal as possible is also very key, so as to kind of cater to all kinds of individuals from different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, trying to find their way. So I'm from India, but I was very easily able to identify what the pharmacy was because there's a universal language that was followed throughout.
We talked about airports, didn't we?
Yeah.
There's a very similar design language within wayfinding systems across
Yeah.
airports. And that's probably the best example, isn't it, of international travel, because by the nature of the fact of the beast, it is an airport is a mode of accessing the world that we live in. So you don't want to design everything completely different in every country, because people are going to be having to learn a new language.
Yeah.
Not just the local dialect and language in that sense, but the design language is something that we were talking about, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that language will help kind of keep a universal, holistic way of understanding where we are and what we need to do, and that is very, very key. Especially when I spoke about how the spatial ability is different for everyone. That is why it is very important that, so my ability to orient myself in an area, in a space might be very different from John's, from yours. I've always not been very, not that great with wayfinding because of this whole orientation that was a little difficult for me. But for example, my brother is great at it. And so for me, if I had a heads-up map, which is basically the same orientation as my direction of travel, then that is great, because so much of the stress is taken out from my journey, which makes the overall wayfinding experience all the more great. I think we should also talk about heads-up map and all of these aspects. Yeah.
There's loads to talk about in that, isn't there? And we'll touch on it just briefly, maybe. I always say, if there's only one thing that we could have in a wayfinding project, what would it be? Would be the map. Just in summary, what does the map tell us? It tells us where we are. We're all used to it on our phones. We get the blue dot. If you're an iPhone, something different on Android, you get the blue dot that says where I am. Point one. It also tells us what's around us. I think that's really important for context, for making that area digestible, making it easy to learn about. We talk about layers of information. take like a town centre, take the food and drink sector, entertainment. That changes from a daytime to a nighttime.
Yeah.
So using that map, we can very easily turn the flip the switch at a certain time of day when the daytime economy concludes and the nighttime economy commences, to ensure that we have all the relevant destinations on that particular map. Digital is another
Yeah.
topic that we'll pick up in the following episodes.
So we've spoken about the environmental aspect of it. We've looked into the human aspect of it. So I think a successful wayfinding system would take both into consideration, and
Definitely, because there's
Yeah.
loads of things, isn't there? And we've just spent a few minutes highlighting some of the top level elements of what wayfinding is. And obviously, as Kevin kind of coined that phrase, wayfinding, it's about, in summary, what did we kind of, at the beginning of our conversation, we started talking about wayfinding is how we find our way around the built environment. It doesn't necessarily built environment, it could be open spaces, waterways, and the open environment, national parks, countryside, etc., as well. So there's lots of different aspects out there of wayfinding, and lots of different user types. Lots of different users within different environments that need different things. So that's really important when we're thinking about wayfinding, that we get a clear understanding. And we mentioned about different people. It's really important to talk and to engage and to get a clear understanding of what's going on the ground, of the types of users of the site, their needs, their navigation challenges, their cognitive requirements, etc., etc. Take, for example, hospitals, dementia.
Yeah.
And really important that that user base will have a different need for navigating that environment. So when we understand the environment, when we understand the people, it's then looking at that toolkit
Yeah.
and saying what are the relevant interventions that would increase, aid and develop people's experience of the journey. There's loads more that we haven't had the chance to cover in this episode, but we're going to cover some of those things in following episodes, around mapping, around accessibility, around digital environments, around all those aspects that we've started the conversation about.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us on this episode of Navigate Now.
So we are your hosts, Sandhya Session,
Jonathan Doxey.
and we are thrilled to have you on this journey of continuous exploration and learning.
Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we continue this conversation, understand great insights and talk to some great guests around how we can navigate around the built environment.
So don't forget to like, share and subscribe and join our growing community of listeners as we embark on this journey of learning and exploration. So thank you.